Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the digital platform, which is the official Facebook page of Sadharan Chandra Mohavidyalaya. As you know, the Department of English of Sadharan Chandra Mohavidyalaya has been organizing a special lecture series. And we are back, that is on behalf of Department of English, I'm back with the session number 9. Now you can think of that what are the other two sessions? Because we have successfully conducted 6 sessions. Then we had some unavoidable circumstances, so we had to test the 2 sessions. Session number 7, session number 8. Number 7 session, that is 7th session is going to take place on 28th July, and an 8th session which is going to take place on 26th July at 7 p.m. and which is the first one, that is 6th session is going to take on 28th July at 7:30 p.m. And in this session, we have this number 9th session that right now I'm going to host a very special guest who is with me, Dr. Anindita Chatterjee. She is an associate professor of Durgapur Government College. But before introducing her on this platform, I would like to play a short video which contains her introduction. And after the short video, I'm going to welcome our honorable ma'am on the virtual platform of Sadharan Chandra Mohavidyalaya. So thank you very much. Let's watch this intro video of her. After this short intro video, I would like to welcome our distinguished guest, Dr. Anindita Chatterjee, on our digital platform. So here comes our distinguished guest. Ma'am, welcome to our digital platform, and thank you very much for accepting our invitation for this session. So, ma'am, if you have few words for our session, and then we would like to go directly to the lecture that we are waiting for that.
Thank you, Gautam. Good evening, everyone. These are very difficult times. We are all going through very difficult times. And this effort that you've taken to organize this lecture series, this means a lot. This online platform, it has its limitations. True that it lacks the human touch. It lacks those, glares that we actually see in the class, during the class hours. But it's a big platform because you can connect to a great number of people. Had not there been this online platform, I wouldn't have known you. And I must say it's been a wonderful experience knowing you, because you have literally, pampered me through this thing. And I am a literally technically challenged person, and learning this entire this new art of teaching. But personally, I would not like this kind of teaching to continue for long, because I miss those classes, I miss those students, I miss my dear people. But it's like dire times and dire strategies evolve. It's good that we are connecting like this. And thank you for inviting me. I hope I can share my few thoughts on some areas which will be relevant for your study, relevant for further interest of yours. So this is an area which I have worked on. So I have worked on this madness. So I will talk about it and try to make it interesting and trying to make it nice for you, happy experience for you. It's not a very uh, good time to talk about something very serious, but then if I try to present something in a very interesting, in a way that stirs your thoughts, that is what I'm trying to do, make you think. So that is what my paper is all about. So I'll go about it. Should I start?
Yes, thank you very much, ma'am. Okay, this session is yours now, and please have your lecture. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to your college for giving me this platform. A good evening to all of you once again. Now, before I begin my paper, you can see the title of my paper is Flashing Eyes and Floating Hair. So this is a very symbolic imagery that I've used. So before I begin my paper, I would like to talk about three significant terms that are very commonly used. We use this term very loosely. We use this term in literature. We use this term in society. The terms are, and I would like you to think about it, the terms are mad, the term is genius, the second one, and then the creative artist. Now, mad. Now, one who is, I might call you mad just because you and me are disagreeing on a particular point of view. Because I don't agree. I am not finding you sensible enough. I am not finding your ideas, you know, uh, satisfying with my sense of rationality, agreeing with my sense of reason. So that is why I brand you as mad. And then genius. I mean, genius is somebody who, comes with a breakthrough idea, challenges the established order, and creates something novel and thinks about something very novel. So it could be that, one who is genius today was once upon a time considered mad because he had the courage and the audacity to think something which was very extraordinary, very unconventional. And then the third term that I want to talk about is creative artist. A creative artist is somebody who is using his visionary and imaginary instinct to create something novel again, bringing up something that was not there hitherto earlier. So, in a way, one who is mad might have elements of genius, might also become a creative artist. So, there is a kind of, though the terms are very different, the labels are very different, but if you reflect upon them, you will see that there exists some amount of similarity, something that, binds them together. So what I've done is I have divided my presentation into two halves. What I'll do is first I'll try to talk about romanticism. Romanticism as a movement that came as a breakthrough, as a movement that came against the age of enlightenment, as a movement that was like a kind of a challenge to the ideas that was established prior to it. And then I will look at Kubla Khan. Kubla Khan, as we know, is one of the most significant poems written by Coleridge. Now, romanticism. What is romanticism? Gautam, my slide number one, my presentation, slide number one. So romanticism is, like we know, it is like a literary and a cultural movement. So it is like it originated in Europe, and it gained strength during the industrial and the French Revolution. It was like this kind of this political. Gautam, slide number one. That's like my introductory page now. Slide number one. Number
Okay,
two. Number two.
number two. Okay.
Yeah, number two. One is my introduction. Yeah, just like the name of the paper. Yeah. So this is romanticism for you. So romanticism is basically a kind of a challenge to the established order, the way of thinking, the age of decorum, the age of rule that preceded it. So it's like a challenge that to the new classical standards of poetry that was prevalent in the preceding age. So the romantics are telling that if you have to look for inspiration, you can look into the heart of nature. They're talking about a desire to return to nature. And the romantic movement receives a kind of impetus with the French Revolution and the Industrial Revolution. We all know this. This is something that is very known to us. So romantic spirit is something that is a kind of a reactionary. It is like a questioning of that something which has been existing. So I am raising a voice against what has been prevalent. My slide number 3, please. So the slide number 3 will tell you that we have traced the origin of the word romance. The romance, the word, as we know, it has its origin in the metrical romances, and it was very popular in France, and it was like the word was it was very popular. The word was associated with something bizarre, something fanciful and fantastical. So the word became, it got a new impetus in the 18th century, with the German romantics, Schlegel, Schiller, and Kant. And then they used the term to describe a school of thought as opposed to the classical school of thought. And they were talking about individualism, they were talking about imagination, they were talking about the relationship between man and nature, a very personal, very kind of a philosophical relationship between man and nature. There was like importance of supernaturalism, there was an interest in medievalism, there was interest in kind of magic, there was interest in these things that was characterizing romantic this cult. This was an ethos, and as we know, the cult of sensibility, it kind of paved its way for this romanticism, because it began with the age of transition. We started writing poetry about nature, but that was a very different kind of a nature, because that is very generalized nature that is very general. But this is romanticism, where we talk about a very personal relationship with nature. So when we are reading romanticism, we talk about the romantic poets. There are like 5 romantic poets that we know, significant names: Wordsworth, Coleridge, Shelley, Keats, Byron, and we begin with Blake. So Blake falls into a very difficult category. Some characterize him as an usherer of romanticism. Some take him as a predecessor to romanticism. So these are the 5 people. So romanticism, it's not that everybody speaks in the same language, everybody is writing about the same thing. There are always, there are a lot of difference of opinion. The next slide, please. So when we go to this romantic age, we will see that there are a lot of difference of opinion. Gautam, the next slide. So when we see, this is the slide that says that, the romantic poets were also essentially different about their approach. So when we see Wordsworth has, in his Preface to Lyrical Ballads, he defines poetry as a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. Now, why I'm telling these things? Because everything will become important when we are looking at Kubla Khan. A spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. We have to look at this word, spontaneous. Something that is, not predetermined or predestined. It is spontaneous. It happens just like that. And then overflow, it talks about an excess of powerful feelings. And he talks about poetry's language of poetry as a man speaking to men. So he's talking about the greater access of poetry. He's talking about, democratizing poetry. He's talking about poetry becoming very, talking about lives of common people. Whereas if you see Coleridge, and both of them had together brought out the lyrical ballads, which was kind of the beginning of romanticism in England in 1798. So in Coleridge, you see a completely different kind of approach to poetry. For Coleridge, poetry was serving the reason to give a pure delight as opposed to science. So he believed in poetry creating a willing suspension of disbelief. So I doubt you, but then I am keeping away my rationality, my reason, and I am, surrendering it willingly, and I accept whatever has been told as truth. It is like, Shakespeare creating a kind of impression of night during the afternoon when Lady Macbeth walks with the candle. So he's creating a willing suspension of disbelief. You are sitting in the broad daylight watching watching the stage and watching a character walking on the stage, and you feel that the way she uses her language, the way she emotes, the way Shakespeare writes, he tries to create that same willing suspension. Disbelief. You're made to think that you're sitting in a kind of a night, in the middle of the night when she's walking. So this is the kind of the power of language that it can do. So against this background, what I'll do is I'll introduce Kubla Khan. So Kubla Khan was written in the year 1816. It was published, Kubla Khan, and this belongs to the supernatural poems of Coleridge. Supernatural. Coleridge was, he was very fond of creating extraordinary. He tried to create an extraordinary impact by using very ordinary and common elements. So with Kubla Khan, what he does is he tries to create a kind of he advertised for Kubla Khan. He used his narrative persona and he wrote a preface to Kubla Khan. The preface, go to my slide please. The preface to Kubla Khan, it was in the year, preface, the next slide please. Slide number 5. Yeah, the Kubla Khan came with a preface. So the preface, it tells that, it tells a prehistory of the poem. The poem, it was Coleridge, as we know, he had this history of, he had a medical history for which he was advocated. The doctor prescribed him laudanum, and gradually he was, excuse me, I have got a very bad cold yesterday night, and that's why my voice is cracking so badly. So what Coleridge did is attaching this preface, a preface which is written in the third person. And in the preface, he tells you that he was, and I was talking about this addiction that Coleridge had with opium. He used to have this opium addiction, and he was reading Purchase's Pilgrimage about the pleasure dome of Kubla Khan, and he fell asleep. And it was when he was asleep that entire poem kind of, he says this entire poem was conceived in his dream, and when he woke up, he started composing the poem. But after he had written around 50 odd lines, he had a visitor from Porlock who came as who visited him on business, and then after he left, Coleridge could not remember the rest of the lines. So he says that this is a fragmentary poem, and he titles it as Kubla Khan, a vision in a dream, and the preface says that this is a fragment. Now, had Coleridge not written about this preface, we would have possibly never seen the that comes. This is a fragmentary poem. Go to my next slide, please. The Kubla Khan, the next slide, the slide number 6. So the poem begins with a kind of a descriptive note. So most of us who've read the poem, I've drawn a few, these pictures I've taken from internet, and they were like, I have Googled them and I've got it from here and there. I'm trying to use them, in this PPT to just, give it add a dash of color, because imagination is always very colorful. I mean, that's what he was trying to do. He was trying to present it as an oriental dream. So Kubla Khan begins the poem. The poem begins with a description of a pleasure dome in Xanadu. So this is, I'll just have a beginning of the poem. In Xanadu did Kubla Khan a stately pleasure dome decree. Now decree is an order. So Kubla Khan had ordered that there'll be a palace, again a pleasure dome would be created in Xanadu. So the Xanadu will have, for those of us who are into popular literature, Xanadu is also the house where Mandrake lives. So Xanadu has magical association. So this place is, this is a very significant place, because in this place also the river Alph is born. Now Alph is also a very conscious choice. The Greek alphabet begins with the letter alpha. So Alph is the river which has its birth here. So this place is a colossal, a sublime structure. The dome represents a state of perfection, and it is surrounded by a paradisal garden which has, man-made structures as well as primitive forests. So the structure of this stately pleasure dome touches it all. The Apollonian kind of art and the Dionysian art, the wild and the civilized. And the river Alph, which originates here, keeps on running across the depth, across the meanders through the miles, and then it meets into a sunless sea. So this is a descriptive poetry. So what is in this description? I mean, this is just a simple descriptive poetry, but this description is very significant because this description reminds us of the description that Milton did in his Paradise Lost of the Garden of Eden, wherein also he assimilated the man-made and the natural forms together. It is a kind of a coexisting of contraries. You will see the man-made structures coexist with the primitive form. And the poem also tells you there were like gardens and also forests. Gardens, as we know, is definitely created by human effort, and there were forests as ancient as the hills. So this is like something that is a kind of, that is almost reminiscent of Milton's Paradise Lost. That is a kind of sublime, that is, that talks about a state of perfection, a perfection which Kubla wanted to build. So he is this ruler, and he has decreed, and he wants to create a state of perfection. This creation myth kind of, we can take it back, and we will be able to remember the biblical story of creation, where God created the paradise in its state of perfection, and God, being omnipotent and omniscient, he was able to accomplish this miracle. Now the second stanza of the poem goes to a completely different level. Then the second stanza of the poem, Coleridge takes it. Gautam, the next slide, please. And the tenor of the poem shifts to the supernatural element. So in this place, the next slide, Gautam. In this second stanza, we will see how Coleridge talks about a woman who comes to this romantic chasm, and she comes to mourn and wail for her demon lover. And she comes during the waning phase of the moon. So during these very dark and very, very eerie landscape and uncanny atmosphere that he creates, the woman comes to wail for her demon lover. Now, whether this woman is a demon herself, whether she is also a possessed spirit or not, that Coleridge does not clarify, but the lover is demonic, and she comes to wail, cry out in this space. So these are two kind of very different landscape which is creating. One is talking about a pleasure dome, and then this same place is a haunted place. And then he goes on to say how in this place the river Alph originated. So once there was a turmoil in this under the earth, and in that turmoil, there was a mighty fountain which was born. The fountain was breaking all the fountain broke through the surface. The fountain broke through all the layers that were there, and it was like, and there were like stones were thrown all around, and the fountain gradually went on to give birth to this river Alph. It was like a coming out from the depths of darkness. Now, previously he had already told you the river Alph, which has been meandering all around, ultimately goes and merges with the sunless sea. So the river originates from the depths of darkness and eventually merges into the darkness again. So this river becomes very symbolic. It is symbolic of this romantic poetry. Remember what I had talked about Wordsworth? The spontaneous, excuse me, overflow. So there is something turmoil, and then there is something burst out. Something is bursting out. Something is breaking, something is radically challenging what has been existing and, ripping it apart. So this idea of imagination was a part of this is how we have described romantic imagination, as opposed to pre-romantic imagination, which M.H. Abrams also describes as a well, which is structured and then water lies deep inside. But unlike it, the romantic imagination breaks through. Now, again, I will ask you to reflect upon the three words with which I had begun: madness, genius, and creative artist. I'll keep reminding you these words because that is where the crux of my argument lies, and that is where I will eventually go to. So the river originates here. The river becomes a symbolic of this life. River becomes a symbol of the birth of poetry. The river originates here. The river is called sacred. The sacred river originates in the same place where we have a pleasure dome. So this is a coexistence of the word pleasure and sacredness, something sacred and profane brought together. So again, a contradiction is created. So where does the river ultimately go and where does it flow through? It flows through caves measureless to man. So if you see the dome is a spherical structure, and then you have the caves. The caves are dark and very, very deep naturally. And also we have this romantic chasm, which talks about the hollow. So the sphere is on the top and the hollow beneath. So there is also the concave and the convex images. There is an antithesis and they are brought together. The Kubla wanted to create, synthesize the contrary elements and create a miracle by creating a pleasure dome wherein he wanted to, bring together sunny pleasure dome, he will say, with caves of ice. So this is what he was intending to do. But in this cacophony that was created, the sound of the river, the water of the river, and then the sound of the gorges, he was unable to, and then he could hear ancestral voices and voices which disrupted his intent, and he had decreed. Decreed means he had ordered, but eventually he had to give up his plan because he was not successful in accomplishing it. Now this is okay. I mean, as so far the poem reads fine. Then suddenly, in the third stanza, the poem goes to a different level. There is an intervention of a personal eye, which talks about a kind of a dream about a damsel, a girl with a dulcimer, which he was talking about playing a musical instrument. Now, incidentally, I have skipped a few lines, which I'll come to in my discussion. So the woman was singing a song. The poet says that once he had heard this song. So once, not every time, not always, he had heard that woman singing of Mount Abora. So could I revive within me that her symphony and song? Could I revive? The use of the word makes it very significant. If I would be able to do this, if I would be able to revive that music, then I would be able to recreate Kubla's pleasure dome. So I would be able to finish what Kubla could not do. I would be able to bring together, I would be able to synthesize the contradictory element and create something more sublime and create, bring together this to all this contradictory element and create this miracle. Because I am a poet, I am the inspired artist. If I would be able to remember that song. So if I would, which means I have not. And it is with this wish that he kind of ends his poem, and he said that if I would be able to do it, then people would think that I am an inspired artist. Now many will say that is this a poem of failure? No, this is not a poem of failure, because I would not like you to take it like that, because look at the last word of the poem, paradise. So this is where I will go to my discussion, because paradise is something I will try to replicate. So he says that he's a fragment. He says that, he has been disturbed by somebody, so he could not finish it. And he says that if I would be able to recreate that song, I would be able to build this dome. But Kubla could not. But Coleridge has succeeded to some extent, because he has written about the poem. He has created something in his imagination, because he knows in reality it might not be possible for him to bring these antithetical forces together. In imagination, it is possible for him to bring together everything, because in his imagination, he is a visionary. Now, this takes me to the discussion where I will talk about the association between imagination, madness, and creativity. So, Coleridge was actually referring to the Platonic idea of creation, wherein Plato says that this madness is something that is inherent in poets who are actually visionaries, because poet until they are mad, until they are able to transcend this existing reality, they are not able to create. So even in Greek times, Gautam, the slides, please. Madness and creativity, the one called Madness and Creativity. The slide, Madness and Creativity. So this is the Platonic idea of creation. And the next slide. Go to the next slide. The next one. So this madness, according to the Greeks like Plato, it says that madness came directly from God. So Kubla Khan could not do it because he was not a poet and he was not a visionary, but the poet would be able to approximate that vision because he is an inspired artist. So Coleridge says that. So Plato claimed that, see that he who had come to the doors of poetry without being inspired by madness was not a kind of a true poet. So possession was a hallmark for a kind of right kind of access to a kind of divine knowledge. So it is only the poet who can write about the paradise in a fallen world. So paradisal state of beauty, which is very much prelapsarian. How can I write about paradise in a fallen world? Paradise has happened, before we had the fall, before we had the original sin. But poets can do it because they are inspired. They have that divinity within them, wherein they can see what we might not be able to see with our eyes of real, this knowledge, the eyes of rationality. So this Plato talks about a poet being an inspired soul. Now, if he is really an inspired soul, and if he would be able to create what Kubla could not, then why would people be wary of him? Why would people say, beware, beware? Now, this is important because madness is a kind of a contradictory term. Though madness is seen as a kind of liberating principle, though madness kind of is an empowerment to accessing something, a kind of refined knowledge lying beyond the human sphere, but at the same time, madness is seen as a voice of aberration, a voice of, which kind of dismantles the order. So that is why we try to curtail madness. That is why we try to put the label madness, and madness is like a stigma. But then Christianity, if you read Michel Foucault and his Madness and Civilization, he says that madness, he talks about the notion of good madness. So he says that he even lists Christ as mad, and he says that if Christ was mad enough, because had he not taken upon himself the sins of the world, how would we attain salvation? So madness is, for Foucault, is something very positive. So I guess that is what Coleridge is also trying to tell you. He's talking about the inspired mania. He's trying to tell you that dome is an emblem of fulfillment, satisfaction. It is round and it is complete. So an inspired artist alone would be able to have that vision. So, but ultimately, Coleridge's preface, it keeps on troubling us. It keeps on telling us, so is Coleridge's vision a failure? No, but then the very fact that if he would be able to do something is, he kinds of by claiming that this is a fragment, he kinds of tells you that, okay, see, I tell you that I have not been able to create this dome in reality, but I have created a poem about it, and I have told you that in reality, such dreams might not be possible. But in imagination, you can bring together this contradictory element. Now, how do we see this visitor from Porlock? This visitor from Porlock is like Blake's Urizen, the voice of reason. He comes as a kind of disruptive voice, the voice of reality, the voice which tries to put madness into a kind of confinement, put madness into a kind of asylum, and give a label and kind of attach madness with a kind of a stigma. This is the way people are treated. So this is the way genius is treated. Genius is kind of, I doubt that first genius, and then once he's like accepted, and then I say, okay, he's genius. Initially, the first challenge that a new idea is kind of creating, a new idea is never accepted. A novel idea is never accepted, because then we kind of try to brand it as mad. So that is why beware, beware. So because now I see the poet having the immense power, the power of the pen, superseding the power of the sword, the power of the poet, exceeding the power of that of the king. So that is why the poet will be an empowered persona. So the idea that he's creating in his first stanzas is kind of that he will be able to replicate them in the last stanzas. And this is also a very important idea, that ultimately he's talking about kind of disruptive voice disturbing him. So, and he's talking about a shadow which falls on the water, and then there is a stone that kind of the ripples, if you the shadow is disturbed, the shadow will never get back to its original form. So that is the way, the true idea, the idea that was in his brain, the idea that he was possibly the true idea, as in the Platonic notion of idea, the idea was kind of, it was subjected to a form of disturbance. So he says that that idea is something that I had and something that I wanted to recreate. But then if I would have that power of music, I would be able to do it. But I'm leaving it out here. Now I have also told you that this is a fragmentary vision. Now he has done it very clever. Now you will be able to see that the moment he tells you it's a fragment, he kinds of, evokes your curiosity. Why is it a fragment? Why is it calling it a fragment? The fragmentary part is because it tells you that we are all humans. In this, he tells you about the inadequacy of language to create something as sublime as, paradise. But the poet is still somebody who is the only one who can go somewhere near it. He might not be able to recreate it, because ultimately God is also the supreme artist. The only one artist who can bring all the antithetical forces together. But Kubla also tried to replicate, and he was trying to think that I'm as powerful as God, and I'm trying to create a stately pleasure dome. But Kubla failed because he's just a normal man. But then you see the poet might succeed. The poet might be able to do something because of his inspired vision. This possession is something that romantic artist sees with a great, the romanticism gave a new impetus to this idea of possession, the idea of divine inspiration or creative frenzy. This creative frenzy is something that Coleridge alludes to. The creative frenzy. So in my dream, in my imagination, I'm able to compose something which might not be possible in reality. So that again takes us back to this cult of romanticism, how this Kubla Khandas becomes a kind of an example of romantic poetry, because it brings out so many things that are so essential to this romantic spirit. The idea of challenge, the idea of bursting forth, the idea of new life springing from the depths of darkness, the idea of bringing together all the antithetical forces, an idea of a coherent vision where the dark and the light, where the sunny domes and the caves of ice come together. The idea that, a man with flashing eyes, a man with floating hair, an iconic idea of a mad artist in creation alone can bring together all these things together. So the poetic frenzy, the symphony, the song are kind of emblematized conditions of poetic creation. So this becomes a kind of, the poem becomes an expression of poetic creation. It becomes a symbolic allegory about the birth of poetry, a birth of life. And it talks about ecstasy, the joy. So the fountain was born out of a spurt. So this is like giving birth. So a mother who gives birth to the child, it's an extremely painful process. So, but then that gives that's a sublime joy to the mother, because the new life is born out of her, out of that darkness of the womb. And then the journey continues till the darkness of the grave. So the elf becomes very symbolic. The river, the fountain becomes very symbolic. It is a symbol of life. It is a symbol of poetry. And it is a symbol of something that touches through the man-made structures, the primitive, and eventually journeys after the meandering motion. It merges into the sunless sea. So it is the poet presents the dome and the river in so completeness. The vision is so complete. The geographical landscapes are so grand, so elaborate, that it is almost like a paradise. That is what the last word is all about. Paradise. So paradise is a fact, and it is not a forlorn hope, because it is a positive statement about the potentialities of poetry. the powers of the inspired poet, the mad artist, the genius, the creative artist who might be mad for the world, who might be a social, who might be an outcast, who might be a tormented soul, who might be, somebody you might not even understand, but he has that visionary. If you read Harold Bloom's Visionary Company, he talks about the inspiration, the visionary ideas that the poets, that always runs inside the poet's brain. So the poet's brain, and when later neuroscience have, studied the human brain, they said that, this is how so constructed that there is an element of mania in almost all creative artists. We've seen it in Nathaniel Hawthorne, we've seen it in Sylvia Plath, we've seen it in many others, an element of mania, an element of, they might have called it schizophrenia, they might have called it manic depressive disorder, they might call it illnesses, they've called it, mental disorders, but this is very difficult to identify it. So, I personally had done my work is on John Clare, and Clare was like, he was identified as a mad voice, because at that point of time, categorizing somebody mad was also very arbitrary. So he was having a kind of hallucinations, because once he was introduced to the world and he became very popular, but gradually he went out of fashion. He was having a lot of issues, and then they put him in an asylum. Once you're into an asylum, you get that label, mad. So once you have that label, you cannot escape out of it. So that is also very important. Who is mad? On being sane, what is sane and what is sanity and what is insanity is something that is very doubtful, because all of us have elements of, these things in us. When we all have our breaking point, we all have our inspiration, we all have our moments of enlightenments when we are most creative. So this is something that Coleridge talks about, is the poet having the power to transcend the limitations of the reality and having a visionary, access to the world of visionary knowledge, wherein he would be able to recreate a paradise. And then the world would think he has drunk on the, he on honeydew had fed and drunk the milk of paradise. So he has been, having an access to the divine food, and he has been empowered by the divine knowledge. So that is what, the far-reaching suggestiveness that kind of Coleridge creates. Go to my next slide, please. And you see the use of the proper nouns, Xanadu, Kubla Khan, Paradise, Alf, Mount Tabora, Abyssinian. So this is also the lineage that he tries to trace from Paradise Lost. And the word Kubla, and then and Kubla Khan decree, and then again you will see the word Kubla, it comes again, and then the Kubla Khan and all is the plan that Kubla had to accomplish this miracle was something that was met with a challenge, that something that met with a kind of a temporary, it was not successful. It could not meet with its desired end. So what happened is, the poet, tries to, he says that he does not spell it out for you, but as, aware readers, we are able to understand that he says that I am more powerful than what Kubla Khan is all about. So we can also see the connection between the Oriental imagery, the opium, and the Asian king, the Mongolian ruler that he had read about in Purchasers. But you will see the stately pleasure dome is not there in Purchas. This is something that Coleridge has imagined. He's talking about the magnificence of the Oriental imagination that always struck him. So the dome is the paradise is something that, and it's a perfect landscape that he's talking about. But perfection always has its threat of its own destruction. So there's nothing, it's not permanent gift, because the ideal life is always open to the forces of evil. It must not only be created by man for himself, but also defended by him. So the river here becomes a symbol of life and in the universe, and which begins and ends with a mystery. So the poem has, elements of mystery. Now the woman who goes to, meet with her demon lover, there's something, there are always deliberate, imageries, and psychoanalysts have read a lot into the poem, because they say that there are, darker areas that Coleridge tries to, gloss over and try and hint at and allude at. So the closeness of the primitive and the nature and the Apollonian and the Dionysian principle is something that Coleridge tries to emphasize on, because this is the vision of paradise that is more important. That is what he's trying to project, that paradise that can be created by a mad poet in a moment of frenzy, and that is something that he's talking about, the moment of creation, the moment that, that epiphanic moment when he'll be able to create that paradise which Kubla had failed. And that is why he is subjected to ritual dread. He's telling about the fail, he's hinting at the inadequacy of human language in a fallen world to create something as paradise. But if somebody would be able to do it, so it would be only be the mad poet. So he's leaving it as a fragmentary, because he's leaving you to a world of interpretation that is also romantic, not conclusive, not binding you down, not giving you a strict, a kind of straight jacketed interpretation, but leaving you with a world of interpretation and telling you that this is what Kubla had said. He would be able to create paradise because it lies within us. Because you see Milton, and he's talked about paradise lost in detail, but when he's talking about paradise regained, he's just shown you the path is not finished. He also tries to tell you this is unfinished, because regaining and recreating is something that lies within us. The potential is within us. So it's not that all of us might be able to do it, but they who are inspired, they who have that visionary power, they would be able to go somewhere near it. They would be able to approximate that vision of perfection. So this is what I had to say. Thank you. And Gautam.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for your wonderful lecture that we have experienced right now. So we have few questions. As I already, in the scroll bar, it's showing that if you have any question, you can drop your question in the comment box, and I will take the question to our guest speaker, Dr. Untitled Chapter. So we have few questions that I can find. I'm taking the question on the screen, and you can get these questions directly. Okay, ma'am. So several wishes we have got. Mostly, okay, I'm taking one question. Hope you can read it. Ria Day. Hope you can read it out on your screen. I'm getting this question on your screen.
Is there a common string of thought that runs through all the stanzas of the poetry? All the stanzas are set in different set of stanzas. Okay. See, the first stanza it talks about a descriptive poetry where he is introducing you to the landscape poetry, and that is that is something happening in the past. And then he's talking about a kind of, he takes the shifts the panorama, the camera eye to a different location, wherein he's talking about again that same process where he's talking about he gives you a description, talks about the romantic chasm, the hollow, and then where the woman goes to meet her demon lover. So these are like two different two antithetical landscapes which are united together. And the third stanza is talking about another dream, and the dream which the poet has it's like a personal, it's a dream vision. So there's like these three stanzas, though are disintegrated in terms of the imagery, in terms of the description, but ultimately they bring together something very significant, because all of them are talking about something intensely personal. One is a personal wish to create the pleasure dome. The other is a personal desire to reunite with a loved one. And the third is a personal dream which is a kind of desire to create something in imagination, which is kind of he has been nurturing in his deep inside his consciousness. So there are three levels of consciousness. Ultimately, we are probing very deep into the human consciousness, and it's like the layered that we are exploring. So it talks about the desire to create, the desire to vent out, and ultimately again that we have the desire to create. So it's ultimately talking about the desire. The creation also is what the common theme that the kind of emotion kind of coming out, and kind of pouring out of emotion is something that is seen in all the three stanzas. And that is also very romantic, because ultimately romanticism, as we had talked about, the overflow of feelings, the excesses are being purged out, the kind of venting out, the sharing, or the I'm telling about my emotions, I'm expressing myself to you. This is something that we will not see in the poetry of the Augustans, because they will talk about something different, because this is romantic, because this is personal. A personal relationship between man and nature is being kind of talked about. And also talks about the second stanza is very important, because it brings out Coleridge's theory of creativity, the creating a willing suspension of disbelief. Now, whether this woman actually existed or not, we don't know. It might be something. The darker, the uninhabited areas of us, that is also being hinted at. So creation involves everything. A poet assimilates all the dark, the good, the bad, the ugly within himself. And he is the one who can create something out of it. So he is the one, he's like the supreme magician who brings out something out of the complete nothingness, or something out of some antithetical ideas. He can synthesize the antithetical ideas and create something novel, create something new. I hope I've answered your question.
We have a message from Anushwa Bor, our my ma'am, and ma'am had also given
Thank you.
a special talk last time. Lovely presentation, a very sequential development of the argument, well researched and well articulated. Thanks, Anindita, and thank you very much, ma'am, for watching this
Thank you,
program also.
Shwadi.
Thank
Thank
you
you
very
as
much.
always.
Okay.
Thank you.
We have two questions. We have two questions. Yes. Uh, Koi Payon Mitra, can we say that Coleridge is? I hope you can read it
Yes,
out on
yes.
your screen. Send it to
Yes, definitely,
Longinus.
because sublimity, Longinus is our idea of sublime, and even Edmund Burke with the idea of sublime, because the sublimity is very important. Because when he is talking about the pleasure dome, he's talking about the idea of perfection, the sublimity. And if you see the romantic idea of sublimity, the way the romantics have incorporated Longinus, they say that something is magnanimous, something is colossal and huge. It does not make feel belittle. It does not make me feel insignificant. It kind of empowers me. It kind of inspires me, and it's like a transcendence that I can achieve at, because that is the sublimity that lies beyond me. So it kind of inspires me to transcend my limitations and create something as close as that. So that sublimity is important, because that is what he was trying. Kubla Khan was trying to achieve. He was trying to achieve a sublime perfection, and he had realized, Coleridge is the being of a ruler with limited vision. He might have failed, but the poet has that inspired, poet with his inspired mania might be, with his inspired madness, with his knowledge of the divine, with a Platonic, and he's referring to Plato and this and definitely Longinus' idea of sublimity, that he can create something out of this, and then he rise out of this material consciousness and create out of something that is much more sublime, and something that is more permanent, that is much more perfect.
Okay. We have another question I'm taking, and you know this person, Saurabh Banerjee. First of all, we must convey our heartfelt thanks to Saurabh Da for helping us organize this webinar for you, because thanks a lot to you. So this is a question that he has for you. Hope you can read it out on your screen.
Yeah, Saurabh, firstly, I must say thank you, because it's Saurabh who has connected me to you. And
Yes, yes.
Saurabh, the question is, if you see the frenzy of the moment of creation, a kind of inspiration of creating poetry, what about Wordsworth's emotion recollected in tranquility? I guess this is Wordsworth talks about the role of memory in creativity. So, whereas he is also talking about the spontaneity of creativity as well as the role of memory in creativity. So, if you see daffodils, so I see that it's talking about daffodils. The first image of the daffodils is very striking, the yellow flowers. And then I take that vision inside me, and then I recollect it in my, in a kind of a tranquil mood, and then that becomes a source of my creativity. But the same man, but the same world, the poet, is writing about a spontaneous, a kind of joy, about something when and he's writing in his Lucy poems also, and in his when joy comes, and he's talking about sunrise, and he's writing about the spontaneous joy that comes to me seeing a natural scene, and that might inspire me to creativity. Whereas Coleridge's idea is a little different. He talks about the joys of the creativity is very essential, because whereas his main idea is to use the ordinary and create something extraordinary out of it. So take the mundane world. So woman, goes to meet her demon lover. So by introducing that small word, demon lover, he's creating a magical impact. So that is something he's inclined towards supernatural, and that is what And I think he was not trying to undermine, because if somebody would have tried to undermine, I think Wordsworth is the more dominant in between their friendship. Wordsworth's voice is heard greater as compared to Coleridge. Coleridge was rather, this kind of a person. He was more interested in this uncanny, unnatural, and unconventional areas, and rather than Wordsworth. Wordsworth was he was talking about bright sunlight. That is more we see in Wordsworth. So in Wordsworth also we talk about spontaneity, and in Coleridge here he's talking about a kind of a birth which breaks, a birth which rips apart, a birth which ruptures. That rupturing is something that Coleridge is trying to emphasize on. That breaking through, that is very important. That is something where he's kind of echoing Wordsworth, I guess. He's trying to. They are like at par. I would not say this is not a deliberate undermining. Let's not read it like that.
The next one.
Oriental influence I was just mentioning, because it's very important, because it's Parchaz's pilgrimage is writing about a Mongolian king, so that it's very obvious. It will be like the connection is with the Asia is very obvious, and the association between opium and Asian king and Oriental, as Coleridge was fascinated by the Orient, and also this the notion of paradise, and is something that he has this Oriental as intermingling Oriental imagery in this depiction of the paradise. And the dome, you will see, that is also very important, because you will see the dome structure, spherical structure, the sound of the round, the symbol of the round, perfect round, and that something that is taken from the Orient. So Oriental ideas are abounding throughout the poem, and that also tells about Coleridge's huge interest in the Oriental imageries.
There is another question. I'm taking a question on the screen. Taking the question on the screen. Hope you can read out the question. Isha Mukherjee. Isha always joins every session. Isha joins us.
See, I mean, it's not about poet. It's about all forms of creative artists, I guess, are called mad. Because I will call, it's about the, this thing about nonsense and common sense. So that which is commonly accepted is common sense. But then nonsense also has some amount of sense in it. Just because, I have saying something that might not be commonly accepted. So that is why common sense kind of brands me as mad. So I am mad because, one, because I am able to see something that you don't see. And for you, I am mad because you see something that I don't see. So this is a kind of contradictory terms. Madness is liberating because it enables me to see something. And madness is also a license, mind you, because if I am mad, I can say something and for which you will not be able to take me to court. So that is why, the foolishness, folly, madness, and they were all clubbed together. And if you see Shakespearean fools, the fools were the people who have the most, they talk the most sensible. They have been given the most sensible words have been given to them. So this is very significant. This madness is like it's a very loaded term. It's a term that is very that has a lot of significance, because madness is something that we have to see as an empowerment in some sort, but at the same time it is a kind of aberration of some sort. So society always tries to curtail madness because they cannot accept. It's like too much of light coming in and too much of new things. I will not be able to accept it because that will kind of dismantle the established order. That is why madness is always seen as a kind of a threat. So madness is always confined. That is what I said. In romantic period, so many people, quoted madness. And I was talking about Clare. Clare was branded mad just because he was having hallucinations. So we had, when somebody, that also, if you see the Victorian age, the treatment of madness is also so arbitrary. So who is branded as mad? How do you cure madness? Because there was no cure. What we could do is, what they did was providing some kind of care. So the care was something, even now, it's very difficult to understand what goes on inside the mind. Because if you are sick, you can go to a doctor. But what if you are having some kind of mental issues? You don't know whether to express it if you're feeling sad. So you wake up in the morning, you don't feel like doing anything. And your parents will say, okay, come on. I mean, you're not, everything is fine with you. You don't have a fever. So madness is something that the world never tries to understand. We are never, sympathetic towards it. We are never accepting to, we cannot take it like that because it's like a stigma. It's like a label. it's like something that it's very difficult to accept. So he's a madman. You isolate him. And what the madman goes through is, I am mad. Okay, I have the capacity to see beyond me. Believe me, the God is not accepting me. So that is why I had introduced my presentation with madness and genius. He who is mad for somebody might be genius for the other. So that is a very flexible term. It's a term. It's a very fluid term. Any more questions?
Okay, there is another question. I'm taking the question on the screen.
Yes, definitely, because Gothic is something that is a part of this romantic imagination. Was, they had this fascination for supernatural Gothic, and that is particularly true about Coleridge. So Gothic association, something that is related to terror, horror, that is we associate with Gothic with. But you see, in Coleridge, there is an internalization of that fear. He does not use something, like headless bodies and the bodies coming out of graveyards, but something he's evoking an atmosphere. He's creating an eerie sense and of the atmosphere. He's trying to create something uncanny by mentioning that woman who goes during that waning phase of the moon to wail for a demon lover. And look at this space where she goes. It's a romantic chasm. It's like it is covered with trees, and it's at the middle of the night she goes there. And no sensible person would be going there in the middle of the night. With some things, by not even woman, and she doesn't even have a name, and you don't know whether this woman is, she might also be a spirit. She's going to unite with a demonic lover. So there are distinct Gothic elements. Even in the Paradise also you will see. And the idea of this mania is also something that is, it's associated with a sense of fear, awe. It's terrifying. I mean, something that, I will not be able to, because that woman, she goes in covert, she goes to meet somebody, because maybe in daylight she would not be able to meet him. So that darkness, that ambience that he creates, it's a kind of evocation of the atmosphere of Gothic. She evokes that.
This is one.
So, Coleridge, I guess that is why he stopped composing poem after some point of time. He arrested his creative vision because he knew, that vision, and moreover, he had that opium-induced trance. He had medical issues as well. So that visionary is something that, each of us, would have that, feeling that we are doing something novel and creative. So, also he had a fallout with his friend. So both of them had tried to write that lyrical ballads. But when he had begun, there was something, a different kind of a plan. But Coleridge knew his idea, his creativity, his idea about imagination was not similar to what Wordsworth had. So it was very evident that he would fall out. And the visionary thing, Coleridge knew his concepts of imagination was very different, because he was not into, because like Wordsworth, who knew how to market his poems, who knew how to, deal with the literary taste and deal with the flux of the literary taste. Coleridge was never like that. He was more of an artist who was creating for his own pleasure. For him, poetry was like an expression of his own self, own soul. So he was writing with his own joy. So that is what makes him. He was not trying to leave a statement as such. It's his own visionary experiences that he shares. So in Coleridge's poetry, they are very different from that of Wordsworth or, for that matter, Shelley, because Shelley is talking about something different. So he is definitely very different from the rest of the poets. Look, Keats also talks about sleep, poetry, but Coleridge is talking about the darker, the unexplored areas of human mind. That becomes very important when psychoanalysis and Freud and Jung comes later, and we try to look into the inner recesses of human mind. That is very important. He becomes very important when we read his poetry in a kind of retrospect. He becomes very important voice.
There is another one from Duipayan Mitra. Duipayan has already asked one question, so another one from him.
I would not say second part is the secondary imagination. First part is definitely primary imagination, but the secondary imagination, I think it starts, towards the end of the second second stanza and the beginning of the final stanza, where he's kind of assimilating and kind of reorganizing in order to recreate. So he's talking about what the idea of paradise as presented in the first few lines, and that descriptive imageries of the primary imagination, kind of disintegrating in order to create something new. He's in that final stanza is alluding to his powers of secondary imagination, wherein he will rely on his powers of memory and his dream in order to create something much more sublime, much more significant and completely different, I guess, because this is his version of paradise, which might not be similar to what Kubla Khan or what the Mongolian king had tried to do. It might be better than that.
Okay, as I find there is no more question left, and all the questions that came you answered. Someone Mohana Dash Mohana most probably. Thank you, ma'am, for taking up my question, for providing valuable opinion on it. And also, I hope that as there is no question left, so I hope all of you have enjoyed the session. Okay. So several wishes. So we have, okay, another one has, okay. Duipan has conveyed his thanks to you. So I Duipan saw, I Duipan saw, no take it Duipan, Duipan said, and Ononna Singho. Okay. The last question we're getting late. Ma'am, what are the supernatural features?
Supernatural features, I've been talking about it all along, because Coleridge's notion of supernatural was based on this idea of creating a willing suspension of disbelief. So this entire poem is like a kind of, he's trying to create a willing suspension of disbelief. He's trying to claim that this is a fragment. He's trying to claim that this is an opium-induced vision in a dream. And then the description that he's giving of that Mongolian king's stately dome, pleasure dome, and then he's talking about the woman coming to wail for a demon lover, and then he's talking about a personal dream which he would be able, if he would be able to recover once he had that dream. So once, not always, not ever, not again. I mean, he had it once. So that is also very important, because everything ultimately says that this is an idea of, this is a supernatural poetry. The entire ambience, the way he has structured the poem, is deliberately leaving you with a sense of unfinishedness, leaving you questions which are unanswered. So that adds on to its supernatural atmosphere. This second stanza is replete with supernatural imageries. The woman, that the waning moon, she's coming to wail, reunite with a demonic lover. This is all, Gothic elements are deeply, inducted into the fabric of the poem. So this is all, the supernatural elements are evoked in the atmosphere. And this is ultimate the poem's intent. The poet's intention is to create a willing suspension of disbelief. The poet here alludes to this notion of divine mania, wherein he would be able to create something in his imagination. So that creating his imagination also refers to something, willing suspension of disbelief. You have to believe that I am capable of creating this dome in imagination. It's not possible in reality. So these are all, adding on to its supernatural atmosphere. You can read A Road to Xanadu, this Livingstone, and then you can read Humphrey House, definitely Harold Bloom, Visionary Company. So these are, these criticisms you can read, and you can also read Kathleen M. Wheeler, the casebook series also. So these are very good criticisms. You can at least read up on them, and you'll get thousands of things on Kubla Khan, because this is so well read, so well commented, and people have dissected the poem literally.
Yes. So it's a really wonderful session, and I'm really lucky to host you. And I've got several messages who have wished you because of it's a wonderful session. And I haven't taken all messages on the screen, but I have read it because most of the messages contain the wishes. So this is the main reason that I haven't taken on the screen, because those things might not relate to this lecture. So the lecture might be distracted. This is the main reason behind this thing. We're not taking this thing. So on this note, thank you very much, ma'am, for joining us and delivering a very special lecture for all of us. And I'm really enriched with your lecture. And I hope that all the participants who have watched it and who happen to watch also amazed it because of some issue, they can watch it because it is already getting recorded on the FB, as well as we will share our YouTube link, and you can get it that on YouTube too. And before wrapping it up, Okay, so before wrapping it up, I would like to once again congratulate Ram for giving such a wonderful, insightful lecture, and I hope the next time if we invite you once again, that we will get the positive note from you, and we will have another wonderful session with you. Thank you very much. And
Thank you,
as
Gautam.
yes, uh, and for you, I have another information that 25th July, which is coming there, on that day we have another session. This is number 10th. That is going to take place on 25th July at 7 p.m. And in that session, we're going to get a very special lecture from Dr. Siddhartha Vishwash, Associate Professor of University of Calcutta. So I hope that session also will be very interesting and insightful. So please join us. And if you'd like to register, you can register here, because on our page we have already given the registration link. So you can go and click on the registration. You can register yourself. Or if you have no interest in registration, you simply come and watch the session and enjoy it. Thank you very much for joining us. I hope that next sessions also will get your support and you will love it. Stay safe, stay protected. Good night. Tara. Bye bye.